the air leaves his lungs in a sudden, ragged gasp, a sound too loud in the hushed reverence that had just moments before settled over the crowd. His face, which had been contorted in a mask of utter disbelief, slackens, turning a sickening grayish-white. He doesn't stumble, not really. It's more like his legs simply cease to hold him up, and he collapses like a puppet whose strings have been cut, hitting the polished floor with a heavy, sickening thud that echoes in the suddenly silent hall. Papers scatter around him, white sheets floating down like macabre confetti. My lawyer, standing tall and utterly still beside me, doesn't flinch. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, remain fixed on his inert form. A collective gasp ripples through the onlookers, a wave of shock washing over the faces that were, moments ago, alight with pride and celebration. Someone screams. It's a high, thin sound, full of panic. The world outside the small bubble of our confrontation, the buzzing energy of the room, the distant cheers, the bright banners celebrating achievement, dissolves. There is only this. The man I married, the father of my son, crumpled on the floor, utterly broken. And I stand there, the papers he tried to bury me with scattered at his feet, his own carefully constructed world shattering around him, feeling surprisingly little, and yet everything at once. A cold, sharp edge of satisfaction pierces through the shock, but it's quickly followed by a vast, hollow emptiness. This wasn't the victory I'd ever imagined. Not in this raw, public, and devastating way. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life had been, for a very long time, a quiet accumulation of small, ordinary moments. It wasn't a life that screamed from the rooftops or demanded attention. It was built on routine, on predictability, on the gentle rhythm of shared years. There was the morning coffee ritual, his hurried departure for work, the quiet hum of the house settling down, my own days filled with tasks and planning, and the quiet focus on raising our son. In the evenings, there was the shared meal, the fragmented conversations about our days, the television flickering, the comfortable silence of two people occupying the same space, breathing the same air. It was a life worn smooth by time, like a river stone, losing its sharp edges but gaining a certain enduring shape. I had given myself over to it, entirely. My own ambitions, the flicker of independence I might have felt in my younger years, had been folded neatly away, tucked into the back corners of drawers, like old letters you can't quite bear to throw away. His career was the engine of our lives, the thing that required fuel and attention and sacrifice. And I provided it. I was the steady hand on the wheel at home, the keeper of the calendar, the orchestrator of logistics, the emotional anchor. I built a life around him, around our son, around the idea of us as an unbreakable unit. It wasn't a sacrifice I resented, not then. It felt like purpose. It felt like love, or at least the practical, enduring shape that love took after 20 years of shared bills, shared colds, shared dreams for a small person growing taller every year. My world was contained within the four walls of our home, the perimeter of our son's school, the familiar aisles of the grocery store. It wasn't a small world, not to me. It was rich with detail, with the subtle shifts in the seasons, the changing light in the living room, the sound of my son's laughter from his bedroom, the quiet satisfaction of a well-managed household. I found joy in the simple things, in the predictable cadence of our days. He worked hard, building his company from a small startup into something significant, something that provided for us, something that garnered respect. I was proud of him. I saw his dedication, his long hours, the stress he carried. And I absorbed some of that stress, trying to create a calm harbor for him to return to. I was the soft landing. We had grown together, or so I believed. Our conversations had become less frequent, perhaps less about our inner lives and more about logistics, about the future we were building, primarily our son's future. He had become more distant. Yes, wrapped up in the demands of his business, the relentless pursuit of more. I told myself this was normal. This was success. This was the trade-off for the comfortable life we had built. I convinced myself that the quiet spaces between us weren't emptiness, but a sign of a deep, unspoken understanding, a comfort that transcended the need for constant communication. He traveled more, stayed late at the office more often. The explanations were always logical, business-related, and I accepted them. Why wouldn't I? This was our life. This was his life, which by extension was my life. We were a partnership, weren't we? Different roles but working towards the same goals. Our son, most of all. His education, his happiness, his future. That was the central pillar, the unshakable core of our existence. And now his graduation. Our son. This milestone felt like the culmination of everything. Years of packed lunches, parent-teacher conferences, late-night help with homework, navigating teenage turbulence. It was our achievement, a testament to our partnership, to the life we had built together. Standing there, in the echoing hall, watching my son walk across the stage, accepting his diploma, a wave of pure, unadulterated pride washed over me. It was the kind of pride that makes your chest ache, that brings tears to your eyes. He looked so grown up, so capable, standing on the precipice of his own life. I caught his eye for a split second, and he smiled, a genuine, happy smile that reached his eyes. In that moment, the world felt perfectly aligned, complete. After the ceremony, the hall buzzed with energy. Families clustered together, taking photos, hugging, laughing. The air was thick with excitement and relief. We found our son in the crush of black gowns and beaming faces. There were hugs, congratulations. I was beaming, my heart full. My husband was there too, standing beside me, his arm briefly around my shoulder for a photo. He was smiling, but there was something else in his eyes, a kind of restless energy, a look that didn't quite match the joyful chaos around us. I attributed it to his usual business anxiety, the inability to fully switch off. I should have seen it. The signs were probably all there, subtle tremors in the foundation I chose to ignore. He steered me slightly away from the small group that had gathered around our son, a casual hand on my elbow. "Just a moment," he murmured, his voice low, almost secretive, lost in the surrounding noise. I followed, my mind still buzzing with the ceremony, already planning the celebration dinner. We stopped by a relatively quiet wall, away from the main flow of traffic. He turned to me, and the smile was gone, replaced by an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger, not sadness. It was clinical, efficient. "There's something I need to give you," he said, his voice still low, devoid of warmth. He reached inside the breast pocket of his suit jacket. My brow furrowed. What could this be? A small gift, perhaps? Something related to the graduation. He produced a thick envelope, plain white, official-looking. My name was typed neatly on the front. It wasn't heavy, but felt dense, packed with something significant. He held it out to me. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for it. The paper felt crisp, impersonal. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a sudden chill snaking up my spine despite the warmth of the crowded hall. He didn't meet my eyes. He looked past my shoulder, towards the exit. "They're served," he said simply. "The papers. The papers." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. The papers. What papers? My mind scrambled, grasping for context, for understanding. A legal notice about property? A tax document. Then, the meaning, in all its brutal, stark clarity, slammed into me. Divorce papers. Here. Now. At our son's graduation. The world outside our small, terrible bubble continued unabating. Laughter, cheers, snippets of conversation floated past. A flashbulb popped nearby. But for me, everything went silent. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin feeling cold and tight. My hand, still clutching the envelope, began to shake violently. I stared at him, searching his face for an explanation, for a flicker of regret, for anything that would make this make sense. There was nothing. Just that same clinical, efficient look. "Here." I managed to choke out, the words scraping my throat raw. Now? At Ben's graduation? He finally looked at me, and his eyes were dead. The lawyer said it was the most unambiguous time, he said, as if explaining a simple logistical decision, like changing a light bulb. Less chance of you claiming you weren't properly served. Everyone is here, witnesses. Witnesses. He chose a moment when everyone we knew, everyone who cared about us, everyone celebrating the triumph of the child we raised, would be present. Present to witness my humiliation. Present to witness the final, public dismantling of my life. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just the act itself, the serving of divorce papers after 20 years. It was the timing, the location, the utter disregard for the sanctity of the moment, for our son's happiness. It was a calculated strike, designed not just to end the marriage, but to inflict maximum pain, maximum shock, maximum disarray. He wanted to ensure I was blindsided, overwhelmed, left with no ground to stand on. And for a moment, he succeeded. I don't remember much of the immediate aftermath. The papers were a blur in my hands. My son found me, his face etched with concern. "Mom? Are you okay? What's wrong?" I remember trying to force a smile, trying to shove the envelope into my bag, trying to pretend that nothing was wrong, that I hadn't just been handed a death sentence for my life as I knew it, not here, not now, not in front of him. The effort was immense, a physical strain that made my muscles ache. I think I mumbled something about feeling a bit faint about the heat. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and knowing in that way teenagers sometimes are, seeing far more than you want them to. But he didn't push. The celebration dinner was a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversation. I felt like a ghost, moving through the motions, my body present, but my mind trapped in a cold, dark place. The envelope felt like a lead weight in my bag, pressing against my thigh. Every time my husband spoke, every time he interacted normally with our son, with a few friends and family present, a fresh wave of nausea washed over me. How could he sit there, acting like everything was normal after what he had just done? The duplicity was stunning, sickening. He was a stranger. This man, with his familiar face, his familiar gestures, was a stranger capable of unimaginable cruelty. That night, alone in the bed we had shared for 2 decades, the weight of the papers felt crushing. I finally opened the envelope. Page after page of cold, legal jargon. Petitions, motions, demands. It was all laid out with ruthless efficiency. His demands were boilerplate, designed to minimize his payout, to maximize his advantage. He was asking for joint custody, though he'd rarely been present in our son's day-to-day life. He was proposing a division of assets that was laughably unfair, skewed entirely in his favor. His business, the empire he had built on the back of my unwavering support and sacrifice, was listed as a separate entity, something he clearly intended to keep entirely for himself. It was clinical, calculated, and utterly devoid of humanity. The next few days were a haze of disbelief and panic. I felt adrift, unmoored. My identity, so intricately woven into the fabric of being his wife, being part of that family unit, felt shredded. I didn't know who I was anymore or what I was supposed to do. The comfortable predictability of my life had vanished, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty. The calls to friends were difficult. How do you explain this? The shame was a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. He had chosen the most public, most humiliating moment to deliver the blow, and I felt exposed, vulnerable, judged. Then came the practical nightmare. His lawyers were swift and aggressive. Letters arrived daily, each one colder, more demanding than the last. They were designed to intimidate, to overwhelm. They were asking for detailed financial records, for inventories of assets, for lists of expenses. They challenged everything, questioned everything. My access to funds was suddenly restricted. He began to shut down the joint accounts, slowly, deliberately, leaving me scrambling to figure out how to pay bills, how to buy groceries. It was a tactic, I knew, to force me into submission, to make me desperate enough to accept any terms he offered. I needed a lawyer. The thought was overwhelming. I knew nothing about lawyers, about divorce, about navigating this brutal, alien landscape. Friends offered recommendations, but I felt paralyzed, unable to make a decision. The legal jargon in the papers felt like a foreign language, impenetrable and terrifying. Every conversation felt strained. Every step I took felt tentative and unsure. I was walking through thick fog, completely lost. The first lawyer I consulted was kind, sympathetic, but seemed resigned. She spoke of compromise, of mediation, of finding a way to reach an agreement. She looked at his demands, at the structure of his business, and her expression was grim. "His position is strong," she said, her voice soft but firm, "especially regarding the business. Proving your contribution, your stake. It will be difficult," she advised me to consider his offer, to try and negotiate something slightly better, but cautioned against a lengthy, expensive court battle. It felt like a surrender before the fight had even begun. Despair set in, deep and crushing. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every waking moment was consumed by anxiety. The life I had built, the future I had envisioned, was gone. And not only was it gone, but the person I had built it with was actively trying to strip me of everything, to leave me with nothing. The betrayal cut deeper than just the end of the marriage. It was a betrayal of our shared history, of the sacrifices I had made, of the implicit promise of a shared future, even one that involved our son grown and independent. It was a declaration that my contribution meant nothing, that I was disposable. I looked at my son, at his bright future, and the thought of not being able to support him, of not being able to provide for myself, was a physical pain. I thought about the years I had spent raising him, managing the household, creating the stable environment that had allowed my husband to focus entirely on building his empire. Was all of that truly worth nothing in the eyes of the law? Was my entire adult life reducible to a few lines in a financial statement, lines that he was trying to erase? I hit rock bottom. I remember one night, sitting alone in the dark living room, the silence of the house pressing in on me, feeling an absolute, soul-deep exhaustion. I had fought for so long, against the disbelief, the shame, the panic, the legal onslaught. But I felt like I was drowning, pulled under by currents I couldn't fight. The easy thing, the sensible thing, would be to accept his offer, to take what little he was willing to give, and try to rebuild from the ashes. But the thought was like swallowing glass. Accepting his terms felt like validating his cruelty, like agreeing that I was, in fact, worth nothing. It felt like letting him win, not just the divorce but the narrative. Something inside me shifted that night. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, more like a slow, internal hardening. The despair didn't vanish, but it was overlaid by something else, a cold, steady anger. Not a hot, volatile rage, but a deep, settled determination. I had spent 20 years being the support system, the quiet partner, the one who made things run smoothly behind the scenes. I had developed skills he had never noticed, never appreciated. I was meticulous, detail-oriented, patient. I was good at managing complex systems, at finding information, at seeing patterns others missed. I had applied these skills to running a household, to raising a child, to managing our family's life. Why couldn't I apply them to this? To fighting back? He had underestimated me. He saw me as the quiet wife, the homemaker, someone who wouldn't understand the complexities of his business, someone who would crumble under pressure. He saw me as a dependent, easily dismissed. He had made a critical error in judgment. He had mistaken my quiet support for weakness. I started researching. Not just divorce law, but his business. His industry. I knew the basics, of course, had heard him talk over the years, had attended company events, had even helped out in small ways in the early days. But I didn't know the details, the structure, the finances. I started digging. Public records. Company filings. Industry news. I went back through old emails, old documents, anything I could find that shed light on his operations. I was looking for anything, any leverage, any weakness. The more I dug, the more I found. It wasn't immediately obvious, buried under layers of corporate jargon and complex accounting. But I started to see things. Patterns that didn't quite fit. Transactions that seemed opaque. discrepancies. Things he had mentioned casually that, in retrospect, sounded like veiled references to questionable practices. I wasn't an accountant or a lawyer, but I had an intuitive sense for when something wasn't right, honed by years of managing household budgets and spotting inconsistencies. I remembered snippets of conversations he'd had, hushed phone calls he'd taken in the other room. I remembered a specific time, years ago, when he had been particularly stressed about an audit. He had brushed it off later, said it was routine, but the memory lingered. As I pieced things together, a clearer picture began to emerge. His success wasn't built solely on hard work and ingenuity. There were shortcuts taken, lines blurred, perhaps even laws bent. He was aggressive, yes, but maybe that aggression extended into areas that were less than legitimate. I found references to offshore accounts, to complex shell corporations, to transactions that seemed designed to obscure the flow of money. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about something bigger. Something he had worked very hard to hide. He had used his business as a shield, a fortress against scrutiny, especially marital scrutiny. He thought it was untouchable, separate from our shared life. But I had been inside that life, at the very heart of it, for 20 years. I knew the people, the routines, the unspoken rules. And I knew him. I knew his habits, his anxieties, the things he was careful about, and the things he overlooked. The key was often in the smallest details, the things he considered insignificant. A casual comment, a name dropped, a file left open on his computer. I began to document everything, creating my own meticulous records, cross-referencing dates and transactions, building a timeline. It was tedious, painstaking work, late into the night after my son was asleep. But it was empowering. With each piece of the puzzle I fit into place, I felt a surge of strength, a sense of purpose that had been missing for months. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting. I was building my own case, my own defense, my own weapon. I needed a different kind of lawyer. Not someone focused on compromise, but someone who understood financial complexities, someone who was fearless, someone who wasn't afraid to go after the jugular of a successful businessman. I searched, networked discreetly, asked pointed questions. I found her name through a tangential connection, someone who had been on the periphery of his business world years ago. People spoke of her in hushed tones, with a mix of respect and fear. She was known for taking on complex financial cases, for dismantling corporate structures, for finding hidden assets, and for being absolutely ruthless. I called her office. Getting an appointment was difficult. Her retainer was astronomical, more money than I thought I could access. But I explained my situation, gave them a brief overview of what I suspected, the kind of information I had gathered. There was a shift in the receptionist's tone. The lawyer's assistant called me back within hours. I had her attention. The first meeting with Sarah Jensen was unlike any legal consultation I could have imagined. She was sharp, direct, and had an intensity that was almost palpable. I laid out everything I had found, spread out my notes, showed her the documents I had gathered. She listened, asked incisive questions, her eyes scanning my evidence. She didn't offer platitudes or false sympathy. She treated me like a partner, like a collaborator. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "He thought he was smart," she said, her voice low and gravelly. "He thought he'd covered his tracks. Most men do. They underestimate the woman who's been watching them for 20 years, who knows their tells, their habits, their vulnerabilities better than anyone." She confirmed my suspicions. The patterns I had found pointed to significant financial irregularities, perhaps even illegal activities. The way he had structured parts of his business, the movement of money, the use of certain entities, it was designed to evade scrutiny, to hide assets, to minimize tax liabilities, and, crucially, to keep those assets out of reach in case of something like a divorce. He wasn't just trying to keep his money. He was trying to hide our money, money that was potentially gained through illicit means from me. "This isn't just about divorce anymore," Sarah said, echoing my own thoughts. "This is about exposing potential fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, things the authorities take a keen interest in." The game had changed entirely. He hadn't just served me with divorce papers. He had opened a door he thought was locked and bolted, revealing a dark, complex structure behind it. He had intended to use the divorce as a way to finalize his separation from our life, including the financial entanglements he wanted to keep secret. He thought he could cut me loose and sail away clean. He had no idea I held the map to his hidden vulnerabilities. Sarah's strategy was simple, brutal, and elegant. We wouldn't just fight his divorce petition. We would leverage what I had found. We would use the information about his potential illegal activities as our primary weapon. His worst nightmare wasn't losing half his fortune in a divorce. It was losing everything, including his freedom, due to a criminal investigation. The timing was crucial. Sarah explained that the most effective way to apply pressure, to force his hand, was to strike at a moment of maximum vulnerability for him. A moment that mattered to his business, to his reputation, to the image he so carefully curated. We needed to mirror the public humiliation he had inflicted on me at the graduation, but on a scale that mattered to his world. We waited. We gathered more evidence, working tirelessly. Sarah's team was incredible, following the trails I had uncovered, confirming my suspicions, building an ironclad case not just for the divorce court, but potentially for federal prosecutors. The stress was immense, but it was different now. It was focused, purposeful. I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting to win. We learned about an upcoming event, a major press conference where he was scheduled to announce a significant new venture, a deal that would elevate his company's profile and profitability substantially. It was his moment in the sun, the culmination of years of work, the validation of his ruthless ambition. This was it. This was our graduation ceremony. The day of the press conference dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I arrived at the venue with Sarah and her team, blending into the crowd of journalists, investors, and business associates. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. There he was on the stage, under the bright lights, looking every bit the successful magnate. He was smiling, confident, holding court. He had no idea. I stood in the back, a quiet observer, invisible in the crowd. I watched him, this man I had loved, this man who had betrayed me so profoundly. There was no longer any warmth, only a cold detachment. I saw the arrogance in his posture, the self-satisfaction in his smile. He was about to announce his triumph to the world, secure in his belief that he had already won on all fronts, including the battle against me. The press conference began. He spoke eloquently, outlining the details of the new venture, the projected growth, the benefits for his company, for the economy. The journalists scribbled notes, cameras flashed. He was in his element, radiating power and control. Then, Sarah stepped forward. She wasn't on the stage, but she moved towards the front, holding a set of documents. Her presence was commanding, cutting through the controlled energy of the room. Someone from his team tried to stop her, but she didn't pause. "Mr. Husband's last name," she said, her voice clear and rixonne, carrying through the microphones. The sound engineers, caught off guard, scrambled to adjust. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to her. He stopped speaking, a look of annoyance flashing across his face. He recognized her. I could see it. His smile faltered. "I'm Sarah Jensen, legal counsel for Mrs. My last name," she stated, her voice calm but piercing. "We have reason to believe that the funding for this new venture, and indeed a significant portion of the assets of Mr. Husband's last name, S Company, are derived from sources that are questionable." A ripple of murmuring went through the crowd. Journalists straightened, their eyes widening. His face paled, the color draining away rapidly. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice tight with sudden fury, the confidence replaced by a raw, exposed panic. "We have filed motions this morning," Sarah continued, undeterred, holding up the documents, "based on extensive evidence of potential financial fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. We have also successfully petitioned the court to issue an emergency order freezing the company's primary operating accounts, pending a full investigation." That's when it happened. The words hung in the air, freezing the company's primary operating accounts. It wasn't just his personal money, it was the lifeblood of his empire. The accounts that paid his employees, managed his operations, funded this very deal he was announcing. Without access to those funds, his business would grind to a halt. The new venture would collapse. Everything he had built, everything he had relied on, was instantly, irrevocably paralyzed. His eyes, wide with shock and disbelief, met mine across the room for a split second. In them, I saw not anger, but a complete, utter devastation. He hadn't just underestimated me. He hadn't seen me at all. He had been so focused on his grand schemes, on hiding his tracks from the authorities and from me, that he had never once considered that the quiet woman in the background might be collecting information, understanding the nuances of his world, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had built his house on a foundation of secrets and deceit, and I had found the critical fault line. The sound he made was the ragged gasp I heard in the opening moment. The collapse followed immediately. The bright lights of the press conference, the expectant faces of the crowd, the triumphant banner behind him, it all became a surreal backdrop to the man lying still on the stage, his world collapsing around him, physically and financially. Someone shouted his name. People rushed forward. The planned press conference dissolved into chaos. While the EMTs worked and the room descended into a frenzy of speculation and panic, Sarah and I stood there, quiet amidst the storm. It wasn't the triumphant moment I might have expected. There was no surge of elation, no feeling of ultimate victory, just a profound sense of finality. The marriage was over, truly and irrevocably. The life I had known was gone, and the man who had tried to erase me had, in a way, erased himself. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal battles, investigations, and media attention. His collapse was just the beginning. The frozen accounts triggered a cascade of problems for his company. The evidence we provided to the authorities led to a full-scale investigation into his finances and business practices. The new venture evaporated. His carefully constructed image shattered. He survived the collapse, but the damage was done. Legally, financially, reputationally, he was ruined. The divorce proceedings became almost a secondary issue, swept up in the larger legal storm he faced. With his assets frozen and the threat of criminal charges looming, his aggressive legal strategy against me evaporated. His lawyers shifted from attacking me to defending him against far more serious allegations. The resolution of the divorce itself was swift, almost anticlimactic, once the extent of his troubles became clear. I didn't get everything, no one ever does, but I secured a settlement that was more than fair, a recognition of my contribution and a stake in the legitimate assets we had built. More importantly, the court acknowledged the questionable nature of his separate business dealings, ensuring I wasn't held liable for any potential criminal fallout. He faced consequences far beyond the divorce court. His empire crumbled. The investigations continued for a long time, resulting in indictments and legal battles that dominated the news for months. I didn't follow it closely. My focus shifted to rebuilding my own life. The victory tasted complex. It wasn't sweet. It was cold, hard, and tinged with sadness. Sadness for the life that had been, for the person I thought I had married, for the painful way it had all ended. Sadness for my son, who had to navigate the public implosion of his father's world. But beneath the sadness was a quiet strength. He had tried to break me, to erase me, to leave me with nothing. But in his arrogance, in his cruelty, he had inadvertently shown me my own power. I had found my voice, my resolve, my capability. I had faced the storm and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. Rebuilding was slow, piece by piece. I found a new place to live, smaller, but entirely mine. I explored interests I had long neglected, reconnected with parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I learned to stand on my own 2 feet, financially and emotionally. The fear slowly receded, replaced by a quiet confidence. My relationship with my son changed too. We were closer, bound by the shared experience of navigating this upheaval. He saw my strength, my resilience, in a way he never would have if I had simply crumbled. The man who served me divorce papers at our son's graduation, who thought he could discard me and walk away unscathed, collapsed under the weight of his own secrets, exposed by the woman he dismissed. It wasn't just about winning a divorce. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity, and my future from the ruins he left behind. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.